Billionaire secretly follows his black Maid home. What he sees in her neighborhood breaks him. In the silence of his $14 billion penthouse, Richard Blackstone watches evening fall over a city he commands but has never truly known. For 8 years, Grace Williams has moved through his marble halls with quiet efficiency, maintaining the illusion that wealth can insulate him from human complexity. Tonight, loneliness and curiosity compel him to cross boundaries he has never questioned, following Grace into a world that exists beyond his carefully constructed comfort. What he discovers in her neighborhood will shatter every assumption he has made about worth, dignity, and the true cost of the life he has built in splendid isolation. Richard Blackstone stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, watching the city sprawl beneath him like a board game where he controlled most of the pieces. At 62, his pharmaceutical empire had grown to $14 billion. Yet tonight the weight of wealth felt more burden than blessing. His wife had passed 3 years ago, his children lived on different continents, and the silence of his pristine home had become deafening. Grace Williams moved through his space with quiet efficiency, her presence the only human warmth in rooms filled with priceless art and cold perfection. For 8 years, she had maintained his world while remaining largely invisible to him, a fixture of competence he had never truly seen as a person with her own story, struggles, and dreams. The evening routine was always the same. Grace would finish her duties at 6, gather her modest belongings, and disappear into the elevator that carried her away from his rarefied world back to whatever reality awaited her below. Richard had never questioned where she went or how she lived, operating under the comfortable assumption that their professional relationship was sufficient. Tonight, however, something stirred within him, perhaps loneliness, perhaps curiosity, perhaps the dawning recognition that he knew nothing about the woman who had witnessed his grief, his isolation, his most vulnerable moments. As Grace bid him goodnight with her usual professional courtesy, Richard found himself following an impulse he couldn't quite explain. The decision to follow Grace was born from desperation rather than malice, a billionaire's attempt to understand a world that existed beyond his insulated experience. He waited several minutes before taking the service elevator down to the parking garage, his heart pounding with the nervous energy of someone venturing into unknown territory. Richard had built his fortune by understanding markets, demographics, and consumer behavior, yet he realized he understood nothing about the daily reality of the people who actually made his comfortable life possible. The irony wasn't lost on him that he could analyze global economic trends, but had never considered the economic reality of the woman who cleaned his home, prepared his meals, and maintained the illusion that success could insulate him from human complexity. His driver waited with the usual discretion, but Richard dismissed him, choosing instead to follow Grace's modest sedan in his own vehicle. The decision felt both transgressive and necessary, a boundary crossing that might finally reveal the humanity he had somehow lost along his path to astronomical wealth. As Grace's taillights led him through increasingly unfamiliar neighborhoods, Richard began to understand that he was about to witness something that would challenge every assumption he had made about worth, dignity, and the true cost of the life he had built. The city beyond his penthouse was about to reveal itself in ways that no amount of money could have prepared him to understand. The neighborhoods changed gradually as Grace's route led them away from the gleaming towers of downtown toward areas Richard had never visited despite living in the city for decades. Tree-lined streets gave way to narrower roads, luxury boutiques replaced by corner stores with barred windows, pristine sidewalks transitioning to cracked pavement where weeds grew through concrete. Richard's expensive sedan felt conspicuous and inappropriate in this landscape, his wealth suddenly seeming less like achievement and more like insulation from reality. He began to understand that Grace traveled between two completely different worlds every day, navigating the vast distances that separated his penthouse from her actual life with grace and dignity he had never bothered to acknowledge. As they moved deeper into Grace's neighborhood, Richard witnessed a community that pulsed with life despite obvious economic challenges. Children played in small parks where equipment showed signs of careful maintenance despite age. Elderly residents sat on stoops watching the evening unfold with protective vigilance. Young adults gathered in groups that spoke of friendship and mutual support rather than the competitive isolation of his own social circles. The buildings were modest, many showing signs of deferred maintenance. Yet Richard noticed gardens blooming in window boxes, murals brightening blank walls, and the kind of human connection he had lost somewhere along his path to extraordinary wealth. This wasn't the dangerous urban wasteland his prejudices had imagined, but a functioning community where people looked out for each other with the kind of care money couldn't purchase. Grace's car finally stopped in front of a small duplex where the front yard showed evidence of careful tending despite limited resources. Richard parked across the street, feeling increasingly uncomfortable about his intrusion, yet unable to look away from the scene unfolding before him. Grace emerged from her car with the same quiet dignity she displayed in his penthouse. But here her movements carried a different energy, relief, perhaps, or the authentic relaxation that came from being in a space where she didn't need to perform invisible service. She paused at her mailbox, checking its contents with the careful attention of someone for whom every piece of correspondence carried potential financial significance. The gesture reminded Richard that Grace's life included concerns and responsibilities completely separate from his own comfort and convenience. What happened next would remain etched in Richard's memory forever. The front door opened before Grace could reach it, revealing an elderly woman in a wheelchair, clearly Grace's mother, sharing the same intelligent eyes and dignified bearing despite obvious frailty. Behind her appeared two children, perhaps 8 and 10 years old, who ran to Grace with unrestrained joy, their faces lighting up with the pure happiness of reunion after separation. Richard watched as Grace knelt to embrace them, her professional composure melting into maternal tenderness that revealed depths of love and responsibility he had never imagined. The scene unfolding before him told a story of multigenerational care, of a woman who worked long hours in his sterile penthouse to support not just herself, but an entire family who depended on her strength, sacrifice, and unwavering commitment. Richard remained in his car, transfixed by the tableau of Grace's actual life unfolding before him. Through the windows of the modest duplex, he could see her moving with familiar efficiency. But here her work served love rather than employment. She helped her mother with what appeared to be evening medication, the careful attention of someone who understood medical needs and potential complications. The children hovered nearby, clearly accustomed to sharing their mother's attention with caregiving responsibilities that extended far beyond the professional duties she performed in his penthouse. Richard began to understand that Grace's quiet competence in his home was built on experience managing complex family needs with limited resources and infinite love. The financial mathematics of Grace's situation began revealing themselves to Richard with devastating clarity. The salary he paid her, which he had considered generous, was supporting not just Grace, but apparently 4 people living in a neighborhood where even modest housing costs consumed significant portions of working-class incomes. Her occasional requests for schedule flexibility, which he had granted with mild irritation, now made sense as the juggling act of someone balancing multiple caregiving responsibilities. The reality of her economic situation struck him like a physical blow. She was working for one of the wealthiest men in the city while struggling to maintain dignity and stability for her family on wages that, while fair by his standards, were inadequate for the actual demands of her life. As evening deepened, Richard watched Grace help the children with what appeared to be homework at the kitchen table, her attention focused and patient despite what must have been exhaustion after a full day of work. The older child seemed to be struggling with mathematics, and Grace's explanations were gentle but persistent, revealing educational capabilities that her cleaning duties in his penthouse had never required or displayed. She moved between helping with homework, checking on her mother's comfort, and preparing what appeared to be a simple but nutritious dinner from ingredients that spoke of careful budgeting and resourceful meal planning. Every action revealed competencies and responsibilities that extended far beyond anything Richard had ever needed to consider or acknowledge. The most devastating moment came when Richard saw Grace sit alone at the kitchen table after everyone else had gone to bed, her laptop open to what appeared to be online coursework or job applications. The image of her pursuing additional education or employment opportunities after managing a full day of work and evening caregiving responsibilities shattered Richard's remaining assumptions about the ease of her life. He realized that his comfortable world was maintained by someone whose own aspirations and needs had been rendered invisible by his privilege and indifference. The woman he had barely noticed was revealed as someone of extraordinary strength, intelligence, and dedication who had somehow remained hopeful and kind despite carrying burdens that would have crushed someone less resilient. Richard sat in his car until nearly midnight, watching the lights in Grace's duplex gradually dim as her family settled into sleep. The weight of his voyeurism felt crushing, but not as heavy as the recognition of his own willful blindness to the reality of her life. He had built his pharmaceutical empire on understanding human need and developing solutions for suffering. Yet he had failed to see the immediate human needs of someone who shared his space daily. The irony was devastating. He had spent billions researching ways to improve lives while ignoring the struggles of the person who made his own life comfortable and manageable. As he finally drove home through empty streets, Richard felt something fundamental shifting within him, a reckoning that could not be undone or ignored. The return journey to his penthouse felt like traveling between planets rather than neighborhoods, the distance measured not in miles but in assumptions, opportunities, and social barriers that had seemed natural until tonight. His building's marble lobby, which had always represented success and achievement, now felt like evidence of unconscionable waste in a world where Grace's children did homework at a kitchen table while she worried about bills and medical expenses. The elevator ride to his penthouse became a meditation on inequality so profound it challenged everything he had believed about merit, fairness, and the distribution of wealth in society. His success, which had always felt earned and deserved, now seemed inextricably linked to systems that kept others struggling despite their obvious worth and effort. Sleep eluded Richard as he wandered through his penthouse, seeing it now through eyes opened by Grace's reality. The artwork worth millions hung in rooms where one person lived alone, while Grace's family of four shared a space smaller than his master bedroom. His wine collection cost more than Grace's annual salary, yet she had raised children who clearly adored her, cared for an aging mother with infinite patience, and maintained hope for educational advancement despite crushing responsibilities. The contrast wasn't just about money. It was about purpose, connection, and the kind of wealth that couldn't be measured in dollars but created the foundation for genuine human flourishing. The morning would bring difficult conversations and life-altering decisions, but Richard already knew that his comfortable distance from human reality had ended forever. Grace's dignity in the face of challenges he had never faced, her competence in managing responsibilities he had never considered, and her persistent hope despite obstacles he had never encountered had revealed the poverty of his own supposedly rich life. The woman he had barely noticed had become his teacher, showing him what true wealth looked like when measured in love, sacrifice, and unwavering commitment to others. Tomorrow would begin his education in becoming worthy of the privilege he had inherited and accumulated, starting with recognizing the extraordinary person who had been serving him while he remained blind to her humanity. The next morning arrived with an emotional weight Richard had never experienced, transforming his usual routine of financial news and market analysis into a reckoning with human reality that demanded immediate action. He waited for Grace's arrival with nervous anticipation, understanding that their professional relationship could never return to its previous state of comfortable distance and invisible service. When she appeared at his door with her usual quiet professionalism, Richard saw her completely differently, not as household staff, but as someone whose strength, intelligence, and dignity had shattered his assumptions about worth and achievement. The conversation that needed to happen would require him to confess his intrusion while proposing changes that acknowledged both his violation of her privacy and his recognition of her true value. Grace listened with remarkable composure as Richard confessed to following her home, her expression revealing surprise, but not the anger he deserved and feared. Her response demonstrated the same grace under pressure that had allowed her to maintain dignity while navigating the vast inequalities that separated their worlds daily. When he began to apologize and explain what he had witnessed and learned, Grace's quiet responses revealed depths of strength and wisdom that humbled him completely. She had known all along the disparities between their lives, had managed the emotional labor of serving someone who lived in luxury while she struggled with basic needs, yet had maintained professional excellence and personal dignity that spoke of character he was only beginning to understand. The practical changes Richard proposed emerged from genuine recognition rather than charitable impulse. A salary increase that reflected Grace's actual value rather than market rates for domestic service, educational support for her children that would provide opportunities worthy of their obvious intelligence, healthcare coverage that would remove the fear of medical bankruptcy from her family's concerns. More significantly, he offered to restructure their working relationship to acknowledge her capabilities beyond household management, creating opportunities for her to pursue the education and career advancement that her evening laptop sessions had revealed. The proposals weren't charity but recognition, an attempt to align his resources with human dignity in ways that honored rather than diminished Grace's autonomy and worth. Grace's acceptance of these changes came with conditions that further revealed her wisdom and strength. The children's education would be managed through her decisions rather than his preferences. The healthcare coverage would include her mother and be portable if their employment relationship ended, and her role in his household would be redefined to reflect partnership rather than service. Her negotiations demonstrated business acumen and strategic thinking that Richard recognized from his own corporate experience, revealing capabilities that had been hidden by assumptions about domestic workers and their potential. The conversation marked the beginning of a relationship built on mutual respect rather than economic necessity, setting the foundation for changes that would transform both their lives in unexpected ways. Months later, Richard stood in the same duplex where his transformation had begun, but now as an invited guest rather than a hidden observer. Grace's home had been renovated not through his direction, but through her vision, creating a space that honored her family's needs while maintaining the character and community connections that had always been their source of strength. The children thrived in schools that challenged their obvious intelligence, their homework now supported by tutors and resources that matched their potential. Grace's mother received medical care that allowed her to age with dignity rather than fear, her condition managed by specialists who understood her worth regardless of her insurance status. Grace herself had enrolled in the business management program she had been researching that night Richard first saw her at the kitchen table, her intelligence and work ethic immediately recognized by professors who had no knowledge of her domestic employment history. Her insights about organizational efficiency, resource management, and human motivation drew from experience that traditional business students lacked, making her contributions uniquely valuable to academic discussions and practical applications. Richard found himself learning from her perspectives on leadership, discovering that his own business practices could benefit from understanding how organizations functioned from every level of experience and responsibility. The transformation extended beyond individual changes to influence Richard's broader approach to business and philanthropy. His company implemented new policies regarding employee support, recognizing that personal stability enhanced professional performance in ways that traditional benefits packages had failed to address. The foundation he established focused not on traditional charitable giving, but on recognizing and supporting existing strengths in overlooked communities, understanding that sustainable change required partnership rather than patronage. Grace became instrumental in designing these programs, her insights ensuring that resources reached people who could use them most effectively rather than those who merely looked deserving to wealthy donors. Most significantly, The relationship between Richard and Grace evolved into genuine friendship built on mutual respect rather than economic dependency. Their conversations ranged from family concerns to business strategy, from community development to global economic trends, revealing the kinds of connections that transcended social boundaries when authentic recognition replaced comfortable assumptions. Richard's loneliness disappeared not through social activities with other wealthy individuals, but through engagement with real community, real relationships, and real purpose that money alone could never purchase. Grace's friendship had taught him that true wealth lay in connection, contribution, and the courage to see beyond surface appearances to recognize the extraordinary potential that existed in every human life. Years later, Richard often reflected on the evening that changed his understanding of everything he thought he knew about success, worth, and human potential. Grace had completed her business degree and launched a consulting firm that specialized in organizational efficiency from the ground up, her unique perspective making her services invaluable to companies seeking genuine rather than superficial improvements. Her children had grown into young adults whose achievements reflected not just educational opportunity, but the foundation of character their mother had provided through years of sacrifice and unwavering love. The duplex had become a symbol in their neighborhood, not of gentrification or outside intervention, but of what became possible when existing strengths were recognized and supported rather than overlooked or replaced. The consulting relationship between Richard and Grace had formalized into a partnership that benefited both their organizations while maintaining the personal friendship that had grown from professional recognition into genuine mutual respect. Her insights continued to influence his business decisions, while his resources provided the platform for her ideas to reach broader audiences and create systemic rather than individual change. Their collaboration demonstrated that meaningful partnership could transcend traditional boundaries when both parties approached relationships with authentic recognition of each other's contributions and worth. The foundation they had developed together had become a model for how wealth could create opportunity without creating dependency, supporting existing community strengths rather than imposing external solutions that reflected donor preferences more than recipient needs. Grace's role in program design ensured that resources reached people who could multiply their impact through existing networks of mutual support and shared responsibility. The approach recognized that sustainable change emerged from within communities rather than being imposed from outside, requiring partnership and respect rather than charity and gratitude. Most importantly, Richard had learned to see clearly, not just Grace, but the countless individuals whose contributions made his lifestyle possible, whose struggles his privilege had rendered invisible, whose potential his assumptions had dismissed or ignored. The evening that began with comfortable distance and voyeuristic curiosity had become a lifelong education in human dignity, authentic relationship, and the responsibility that came with resources. Grace's teaching had transformed not just his understanding of her worth, but his recognition of worth itself, revealing that true value lay not in accumulation but in connection, not in possession but in contribution, not in isolation but in the courage to see and honor the extraordinary humanity that existed everywhere, waiting only for recognition and support to flourish. Richard's journey from voyeur to partner revealed that genuine wealth lies not in accumulation but in authentic human connection, not in comfort but in the courage to see clearly. Grace's dignity in the face of struggle, her strength in managing impossible burdens, and her grace in accepting recognition transformed them both. Their story reminds us that the most profound transformations begin when we dare to see beyond our assumptions to recognize the extraordinary humanity that surrounds us, waiting only for acknowledgement and support to flourish. What might we discover if we approached every person with the curiosity to understand their full story?